Benvenuti a UC People, questo è un altro evento dello UCUG.it. Oggi abbiamo lo UC Coffee Break con Debbie Arbeeny. Debbie, sorry, did I say your surname right? Hello? Okay.
Yes, you did. Yep.
Okay, sorry, just to check if I pronounce it very in the right way. So, back in Italian, questo è lo UC Coffee Break del 18 novembre e abbiamo con noi Debbie Arbeeny di Modality System che presenterà Skype for Business Adoption. Hi Debbie, thank you so much for being here. I hope that I, said in the right way your surname. If not, please correct me and again apologize for my not correct pronunciation. And over to you if you like.
Great. Thank you so much, Fab, and thank you for inviting me to present to your coffee break for your UC group. I'm just switching over to my slides, so give me just a moment here while it loads up on my system. So just as a quick introduction, my name is Debbie, and I lead the adoption practice over at Modality Systems. I came to Modality after a 13-year career at Microsoft, managing their UC deployments and adoption programs from Skype for Business, before that Link, OCS, Placeware, Live Meeting. So I've been working in this space for several years, and I'm happy to be sharing some best practices with you, some ways that you can think about user adoption in getting your users to start using a technology like Skype for Business. So what I'd like to do is just start off with what I call guiding principles. These are just things to keep in the back of your mind as you start thinking about what is adoption and why is it so critical. So I think of adoption as a habit, right? When we, whether you're eating healthy or not eating healthy, or working out or not working out, that's a habit that you have. It's a daily practice of the way you live your life. And habits are hard to make. They're also very hard to break. So when it comes to business and technologies that help you communicate, trying to adopt a new technology and getting your entire organization to start using a new technology is very hard, but it also has a lot of benefits. It helps realize your return on investment, whether you're looking for cost savings, employee satisfaction, improved operational efficiencies. When users start using the technology, that is when you start seeing results. As we talked about, it requires that users create a new habit, and changing the way you work is hard. Making any change is hard. I know every year I have a New Year's resolution to go back to the gym that lasts for about a month, and then I go back to my old ways. So creating and keeping a new habit is very hard. And the fifth line there down that says change is always an option. This is so critical to keep in mind. Users have the option to go back to doing things a different way. They don't have to, for as much as organizations like to believe that they can force someone to change. As adults, we don't like to be forced into anything. And if you try to force change, they will push back. And in just a little bit, I'll talk about what that push might look like and how to recognize that and how to counteract that to get users to want to change. It all comes down to the fact that just deploying the technology and putting an icon or a client on someone's desktop is really not enough. It's not enough to get users to want to change. And let me share just a few examples of what I mean by that. These are studies that were done in various research projects by not Modality Systems, but different companies around the world. And the first one states that 70% of corporations fail to get users to change their behavior. And when asked why, almost half of them said they didn't focus on the user. They didn't have the right adoption or change management strategy in place to get users to want to change. Alternatively, when asked, well, how are you defining success? They had no idea. They basically defined success as the technical deployment. The client is deployed and it's logged in on the user's desktop. just because it's there doesn't mean it's being used. It's like buying a new car and having it sit in your driveway, right? Unless you're using it, you're not really getting the value out of it. And then we see a lot of companies that just send users to training. They send out an email that announces a new technology and points users just to a training class. I think we could all, if everyone that's listening to this webcast thinks back, I think we could all relate to a time when your organization had you attend a training class and you had no idea why you were there, what you were doing, or how the class related to you, but you sat through the class because you had to, and then you went back to your regular daily work life, and you did not pay that class any additional mind. It just went out the window. Everything you just learned went in one ear and out the other. So people forget what they learn. If they don't know how to apply it and how it's relevant to them, they're not really going to pay attention. Now, the last one here, I talked about how change is always an option. And this is the concept. It was a relatively new term to me. I learned it just a few months ago, called shadow IT. This is where users told us, or told the research study, that they brought their own solution. They said, I don't understand what this company is doing, so I'm just going to do my own thing. And it's not as relevant, I don't think, for a technology like email. Right? Users are not going to go find their own corporate email to use instead. But when it comes to UC, there are so many products out there, both paid for and free. I can't tell you how many users said, I use Google Hangouts or Google Chats or Jabber, these other tools that are out there, because they didn't understand the tools that the company deployed for them. So shadow IT is a very real concept of users bringing their own devices, their own UC tools to communicate with others in their organization. And in the end, it leads to an infiltration of your network of all of these unsupported tools. And it also helps disconnect employees, because you can only communicate with people that have that other tool deployed as well. So again, it's really important to focus on the user and what it means for them, and really help drive this change over to the new technology, and in the end help create that new habit, which leads to adoption, which leads to that return on your investment. So what I'd like to do is share two quick customer examples with you. The first one, these are two customers I worked with, and I like to use this concept of a push versus pull strategy. So push is when you push someone into changing, right? That's the email with a link to training. You don't have an option, I'm just putting this out there for you. Pull is when you really get them to pull into you, and they're coming to you, and they want to be part of the solution. They don't feel like they're part of the problem, they want to be part of the solution. So I worked with these two customers. I gave them the exact same guidance, tools, and resources. One customer opted to not do it. They didn't want to waste their time, as they called it. They just sent an email with a link to training. The other customer took our advice and used our resources, our email templates, our value messaging. They set very clear goals. They made sure their support desk was ready to take calls from end users. And let me share with you those results. The bottom line, which almost is unnoticeable because it's very flat, that was the first customer that tried to push users into changing. The second line is the orange line, which is the customer who followed our methodology. They had 44 times the amount of usage and adoption that the first customer did within 12 months. That first customer was still trying to get users to use the technology. And what ends up happening is they're actually spending more time and more money than had they just focused on this up front. So again, it's not, and I'll share some of those best practices with you a little bit later on that helped that customer achieve that 44 times amount of results. The next customer example I'd like to share has to do with enterprise voice. So enterprise voice is definitely a new solution for some. Many customers are just now starting to get on board and moving to online voice solutions like Skype for Business. And again, we had a customer who did a push strategy. Their push strategy was users went home on a Friday afternoon and they had a desk phone sitting on their desk. They came in Monday morning and they had a headset plugged into their computer. The phone was gone. It was picked up. And they had no idea what to do. They didn't know what that meant. There was no warning. There was no notification or training or involvement. It was just a headset plugged in. And a few weeks later, the customer called us up and they said, your product is broken. And they said, we're looking at usage. We're tracking usage data, and usage is at 0 for enterprise voice. And that can't be because we didn't give them an option. And of course, my response, which you could probably guess by now, is change is always an option. So I said, you know what, let's talk to these users. Let's not assume that we know what's going on. So we did that. We went out and interviewed and sat down with end users. And you know what they told us? They all started using their cell phones. They had no idea how a computer can be used as their phone. They knew they didn't have a desk phone anymore. So they used the next best thing, which was their cell phone. They still had to make phone calls, and that was all they knew how to use. So in talking to the end user and really positioning the value of using Skype as your phone, we started asking them things such as, you know, do you feel tethered to your desk because you're waiting for a phone call, or you go out to lunch, or you go into a conference room and you miss that really important phone call, or you go home on the weekend and you missed that call that came in, and we saw a lot of heads nodding yes. And we said, well, now that your computer is your phone, your computer goes with you. You have a laptop. Most users had a laptop. Your phone now goes into the conference room. It goes home with you on the weekends. So if you really need that to make that call or receive that call, your phone is with you. You can transfer it to your cell phone. You can have it simultaneous ring. And once they started seeing the value, within 2 weeks, users were getting it. And their satisfaction rating went way up. They said, wow, it's so much easier to communicate using my computer as my phone. So again, had the customer taken that time initially to talk to end users and really focus on the value messaging, they wouldn't have found themselves trying to create a second first impression, if you will, and getting users to switch over. So that's the push. The pull strategy, this is a customer, I love this example. They did everything per our recommendations, and really importantly, they did what I call a device bar. And because they were switching to using Skype as their phone, they had the headset that's wireless, that's wired, with 2 earpieces, with 1 earpiece. There's so many different options out there. Users were able to pick them up. A device bar is basically setting up a series of devices in a public area, in your cafeteria or in your mailroom, in a public area that's accessible to your users, where they can go and try them on. And by that simple fact, users were able to say, no, I can't wear this one headset because it's just too uncomfortable. Or I don't like the 2 earpiece look if I have to be on video. And it allowed them to really pick the device that was most relevant for them. So it allowed users to, again, feel part of the solution, not part of the problem. So it's really critical. And users were happy. They had their device. They knew what the value was. They were able to just start using Skype as their phone from day one. So again, a little bit more about creating that value, which helps create that new habit, which drives adoption and subsequent ROI. So what I'd like to do now is share some of those best practices. I mentioned it's not really rocket science. It's just some core things that you can do to really make a difference in your organization as you're starting to look at driving value and driving adoption of a technology like Skype for Business. The first one, communicate change early on. I call this day 0. It's not even day 1 of when the technical deployment is completed. Day 0 is the day you make the decision to go to this new technology, or at least evaluate the new technology, because people will hear that something is changing. One person tells someone else, they tell someone else, and before you know it, there are rumors flying all over the place. And a lot of times those rumors are not very good, especially if someone doesn't want to change. They're the first to start spreading the bad news, if you will. By communicating that change early, you're getting to control that message. You're getting to tell users what's going on, why it's so important, how they can be part of that solution, and what that value messaging is. So I call this really the ABCs. It's acknowledging that something is changing and acknowledge it early. That works to help build user trust. That's establishing the what's in it for me. What's the value add to those end users? And then you're confirming that users are ready. You're confirming that they have the right devices. You're confirming that they are ready to make the change. You're confirming that the clients push to the desktops. You're really taking all of the steps to confirm success. So that's the first thing that you want to do. Think about starting that communication cycle really early on. The next thing you want to focus on is the individual. Now I know if you're thinking, well, my gosh, we have 5,000 users or 50,000 users, that's a lot of individuals to focus on. So what I like to do is focus on 3 to 5 core personas. I call this role persona mapping. And what this allows you to do is target specific user groups. Maybe it's your executives. Maybe it's your road warriors or those people that travel a lot. Think about user groups within your organization that have a specific use case for a solution like Skype for Business, that have a unique way that they might communicate or a very critical way that they need to communicate. And then what I call is I do this RPM method, or role persona mapping, where I take that user or that user group and I identify what are those common characteristics that they have. So for example, an executive, right? They are building relationships. They're building trust. They're all about numbers and about sharing results and making the, being the voice of the customer. A day in the life, what does that look like for that user? They're running from meeting to meeting. They're relying on their executive admins to help get them coordinated with other users. They're frequently traveling, so they're out of the office quite a bit. So you start identifying what does a day in the life look like for this role? And then what are the 3 to 5 features that Skype for Business can help with? So, for an executive, it might be delegate scheduling or connecting with a quick IM to get to get an answer to something, or application sharing to share out quarterly numbers with users. So you identify just the core attributes that Skype can provide value for that user. And then you think about, how do we train them? An executive does not have 2 hours to sit through a training session like a general end user might. So for an executive, you might say, okay, I have 15 minutes. What can I tell them in 15 minutes? What 3 to 5 features can I cover in 15 minutes for them? And what is the value messaging, right? What will resonate with them based on how they need to operate on a day-to-day basis? And then finally, what devices do they need? Again, for an executive that's traveling all the time, or an executive admin that's running between office and, between their desk and the office, having a headset that's wired, that's plugged into their computer is probably not the most beneficial device for them. So it's thinking about what devices are most critical to this user. So go through that mapping for just 3 to 5 core user groups. That's it, the top ones. For everyone else, think about core business use cases. What kind of meetings and communications does your organization do? And I like to narrow it down to 3 core pillars. There's one-on-one communication. So you might, whether you're working on a project or whether you're trying to build rapport with a new customer, that's your one-on-one communication. Then there's team building communication. That's your project teams, your weekly team meetings, even sales demos where you're getting a group of people together in a virtual room to communicate and collaborate. And the third communication style is one-to-many. That's a webinar or your all hands meetings. So think about, for your organization, what types of users, what kind of business scenarios fit into those 3 buckets. And then again, do that mapping. What are the features within Skype that map to those 3 scenarios? What kind of devices are really relevant for those scenarios? What kind of value messaging can we give our users? And then that helps really inform your communications and your awareness to your users. It also helps inform your training. It also helps inform your support desk. What type of questions might they get based on how your organization might use Skype for Business? So really start thinking about all of those different facets within your organization. And really important, as you're thinking through all of that, really be careful about doing that push strategy. As adults, I think we can all relate to, we don't like to feel pushed or told what to do. Here in the U.S., I know if your husbands don't like to be told to take out the garbage, right? They like to feel part of that process of, I made the decision to take out the garbage, even though as a wife, we have the tendency to make them think that we're telling them that. So this is really important. It's, create that pull strategy instead. Otherwise, you find yourself creating or managing resistance instead of managing change. That change curve that you see on the screen, this is not related to Skype for Business. It's not related to business at all. This is a human change curve, regardless of what type of change is going on in your life. Of, whether you need to move to a new city or, take on a new job, or you just, your car finally died and you had to go buy a new car. There's this resistance. I don't want to do this, right? But the sooner you start seeing value, the sooner you start exploring how that change can benefit you, and then the sooner you get that commitment, which is really that adopted state. So this is just, it's natural human behavior, and it applies wholeheartedly to changing within a technical environment. So definitely be careful about pushing users and focus on, again, creating that value messaging, doing that use case and role persona mapping to really hone in on the value add for those users. And really remember, it's a lot more than just training. Take a holistic approach. It's about the value messaging, the marketing and awareness. It's about finding the right devices. It's about making sure your support agents and your help desk are ready to take calls. And it's really about communicating any policies or governance that might relate to Skype for Business about how people should be using it. So really think about that, of how can you pull this whole story together for your end users, and really drive that value messaging home. And it's not just an email with a link to training. There's so much more you want to accommodate and think about there. And that really helps drive some of those early adopters and make them be part of that majority as they move over to change. And then really important, you want to sustain your results. It is so easy to create excitement. Right? It's so easy for people to get all caught up in something new and exciting. We call it the shiny new object, right? There's, ooh, what is that shiny object over there? And you're drawn to it, and then you get bored and you go back to your old ways. Again, creating habits takes time, and it's hard. Change is hard for anyone. So all of that excitement has a tendency to go away. So the more you can plan ahead to sustain that results, the faster you're going to start seeing those habits form, the faster you'll see adoption, and the faster you'll start seeing ROI. So whether that's monthly newsletters, having end users share success stories, creating champions and getting users, your early adopters internally, to start helping others. Make Skype for Business awareness and training part of every new hire orientation. Get them using it from day one. Create a plan for announcing new features or showcasing a new way to use Skype for Business. Anything you can do to continue that excitement, and maybe once a month and then maybe once a quarter, once adoption really gets underway, just keeping it top of mind for users is really critical. So I encourage you to think outside the box of ways that you can continue to drive that awareness. And really important, make sure you have clear goals that you're working toward. I like to call these set big goals, but celebrate small milestones. So set your big goals. We want to see, 1 million minutes of usage, or we want to save $5 million within 12 months. But what kind of goals can you set on a monthly basis to let you know you're on track? Maybe that's, we want usage to increase 10% or 20% month over month. We want to see peer-to-peer usage or conferencing usage increase. So think about what kind of goals you can set that might take a little bit longer, 12 plus months to realize, but then how can you celebrate small wins to let you know and let your users know that you're on track? So think about that. It's not just about the initial rollout, it's about sustaining those results to plan ahead. As we know, it's a technology that's ever changing. So you want to make sure you're planning ahead to maintain the results in the long term. So let me just summarize what I've talked about so far. This is really the approach that I take to user adoption. Everything I talked about today keeps the end user at the focus of everything I'm doing. So I work in parallel with technical deployment teams. I'm not a technical person by any stretch of the imagination. I know a little bit about the technical side, but it's really all about how does that technical implementation relate to how an end user will adapt to this new technology. And it's about pulling those pieces together. So it's a parallel work stream, but it's really needing to work together at the same time so that you have true success. It's leveraging those ABCs, the announcing the change early, building user trust, letting users feel part of the solution by selecting their own device. Even if you give them only 3 devices to select from, they still feel like they're making a choice. And then confirming that your organization is ready, confirming network readiness, confirming that users have everything they need to make that change. Targeting those different user personas and core scenarios. It makes users feel like you get them and you understand the way they need to work and that you're looking out for their best interest. So when you include users, and especially for those 3 to 5 user personas, it really helps the user feel like your organization cares about them. So that's really important. Making note that it's not just about training. It's about the value messaging. It's about the right devices. It's about making sure your support desk is ready to support users. And then it's really about planning for the future, of making sure that you're tracking usage, you're tracking adoption, and you have those activities in place, whether it's a newsletter or encouraging success stories or highlighting a new feature like the meeting lobby. I ask users all the time that have been using Skype for Business, I said, great, tell me how you use the meeting lobby. And they have no idea what the meeting lobby is because they've never touched it before. And we start talking about different ways you can use the meeting lobby to control your audience and let people in when you're ready. And it really creates this more formal environment, and they get so excited about that. So think about some of those features that users may not be using and highlight those. It starts adding, I call it starting with a fruit basket, and maybe there's only apples in the fruit basket. And each month you're adding a banana and you're adding an orange or you're adding strawberries. You're starting to build this great fruit basket for these users. And it's allowing them to see different ways that they can use this technology. And then finally, one of the ways we also help integrate is by aligning with the Skype Operations Framework, or SOF. If you're not familiar with that, I encourage you. This is a framework put out by Microsoft. It just launched a few months ago. And there is a whole adoption section. So the Operations Framework is really an organized approach to both deployment and adoption. And from an adoption standpoint, if you can look at the graph there on the lower right corner of your screen, you'll see in the Deliver section there's a little section called Adopt. That is simply the act of launching Skype for Business. Adoption is really the planning and execution and management. It's everything I talked about today. So it's not just about that one little adopt piece where you're pushing this out to end users. It's planning during the plan phase of setting your goals and looking at personas and testing your environment. It's getting everything ready for that adopt execution. And then once you execute, it's about moving into the operate phase, which is that run state, or that continuing of the momentum. So while you might look at this operations framework and think, oh, I just need to focus on adopt during this one little section, keep in mind the way Microsoft defines that, it's just the act of executing, the planning and maintaining the actual adoption tasks happen throughout the entire life cycle. So I encourage you to download the materials in SOF and look at the adoption components. I actually wrote a lot of those while I was with Microsoft, so I'm familiar with those, and they're all applied to what we do here at Modality. So encourage you to take a look if you're not familiar with the operations framework. It's a standardization that Microsoft is putting out for all Skype deployments moving forward. And if you do have questions for me, I'm definitely happy to help answer or point you in the right direction. So feel free just to send me over an email at info@modality and direct it to Debbie, and it'll make sure it gets to me. So feel free to reach out at any point in time. With that, I hope I shared some valuable insight. Fab, I will turn it back over to you if you have any questions for me
Yes.
or to wrap up.
Well, you definitely indeed shared, a very important, values with that for us. And I just want to say personally that this is so true and is always so underestimated. And I believe, this is actually basically the big piece of the iceberg underneath the tip. When, adopt like a new technology, especially like, UC that can be extremely different from the way people were used to do things. So thank you so much, Debbie, for being with us. I'll take over again just to say thank you to the audience in Italian, but stay with us because then I'll talk to you again. So again, I don't have words to say thank you so much. I really wanted this session actually to be, public for our folks because I believe, there is a lot of, luck out there, to be honest with you. And I really thank you for that again and again and again. I'll take over. Sorry. I'll switch in Italian for a sec, ok?
Sure.
Ok. Allora, questo era lo UC Coffee Break del 18 novembre. Debbie di Modality System era con noi e ci ha presentato Skype for Business Adoptions. Come avete potuto vedere, questa è stata veramente una puntata molto importante. Adoptions, adoptions, adoptions. Con questo vi ringrazio. Il nostro prossimo appuntamento è per lo UC Launch del 1 dicembre. Ci sarà The Contact Center Landscape with Skype for Business, che era un UC Launch che avevamo lanciato tempo fa, ma abbiamo dovuto rimandare e adesso ce l'abbiamo online. Con questo vi ringrazio a tutti e ci vediamo alla prossima.